Hey folks, there was a recording error with this footage that caused some really choppy sound, but since most of the video is going to be sped up with overlaid music or voiceover, I'm hopeful it won't be too annoying. It cleared up at the time of the Shadow Pieces fight. I also owe everyone an apology for taking so long with this. I'm working on a couple other projects that I thought I was going to finish in time to release alongside this episode, but they're turning out to be more of a challenge than I'd anticipated. I'm planning to get those done before the end of September, and we'll see how that goes. I'm very excited about them, but I don't want to spoil too much, and I've rambled enough. Let's get back to Wendy and Friedrich. I only had seconds to spare, but I made it. Now I have to hit the statues each one more time before the full moon ends to bring them to life. In hindsight, animating the bishop first was a bad idea. I didn't have any armor, so its ranged attack did full, nearly unkiteable damage to me. Fortunately, Abby saved me from myself and drew the bishop's aggro while I animated the other statues. In hindsight, animating the rooks second was an even worse idea. Rooks are the deadliest by far of the 3 clockworks while Friedrich's unmounted. Every charge from the rook deals over 240 damage to an unmounted beefalo, enough to kill him in just 5 hits. I should have saved the rook for last so that I could remount Friedrich immediately. I used the pan flute here to break up the fight between Friedrich and the rook before it got even further out of hand. Now that he's mounted again, it's not so dangerous. I decide to come back to finish the bishop and knight another time. Friedrich's probably at less than half health after the mishap with the rook, and the fight itself isn't as time sensitive as the summoning ritual. They'll stick around. I'm going to farm the Volt Goats for their horns now. Being naturally close to the Volt Goats is one of the advantages of basing in Antlion's Oasis. I was lucky enough to get 2 herds of goats in this world, which means double the rate of horns. Eventually I'll pen the individual herds apart to make sure I don't accidentally wipe either of them out. Volt Goat horns can be used to make the Morning Star and the Weather Pane, which are really useful weapons to have against Toadstool and the Ancient Fuel Weaver. The Morning Star is also just generally really useful in the caves. I'd say it's probably my favorite weapon for Wendy in most situations where an ornery beefalo isn't available. There's nothing left to do for the Shadow Chest fight, but wait. The new moon's tomorrow night. There are 2 major mechanics to deal with in the Shadow Chest fight. The first one is knowing that every time you defeat one of the 3 pieces, the survivors become significantly stronger, so you'll want to plan in advance the order that you'll focus them down. I chose the Knight first because I knew that the 2nd tier Bishop is slightly squishier than the 2nd tier Knight, but in retrospect I'm not sure that was the optimal choice. The 2nd tier Knight only has single target attacks, so I could have made him split his damage between Friedrich and Abigail to keep her around with her nighttime bonus for longer. But I made my bed, and now I've got to lie in it. This is definitely the most dangerous part of the fight. One of the other major mechanics of the Shadow Chest fight is that a lot of the attacks are unkiteable, especially the tier 2 Bishop's swarming bats. You can limit yourself to being hit just once or twice from the Bishop's swarm, but one way or another you're going to take damage. And if you take too much, there's no easy way to bail on the fight. The shadow pieces aren't bound to a particular location like the Dragonfly, Antlion, or Bee Queen. They'll chase you really far, and they're immune to the Pan Flute, so I need to kill the Bishop as quickly as possible before he wears Friedrich down to critical health. I wanted to get this colony of Pengals involved in the fight to try to kill the Bishop faster, so I baited him into attacking them. Unfortunately, Pengels don't seem to be able to recognize the bishop as the source of the damage and get aggroed properly, so I took a bunch of damage for no good reason. Some of the Pengels died and summoned Abigail though, so it could have been worse. This is the final stage of the fight. Like the bishop's bat swarms, the tier 3 rook has an attack that damages an area so big and centered on the player that it's essentially unkiteable. If you thought Deerklops's melee attack range was pushing the boundaries of what's reasonable and fair, the tier 3 rook's attack area is almost twice that size. But it becomes kiteable, just barely, with enough bonus move speed. I wasn't sure it was possible for an ornery beefalo to get the necessary bonus move speed, and I knew it was certainly impossible for an ornery beefalo to fight the tier 3 rook by tanking, so I wasn't sure it was actually possible to beat this boss on an ornery beefalo at all. But a West main who goes by the handle Mountain 520 showed that it is absolutely possible if you use a glossamer saddle, and a player called Auxerium recently showed that it's also possible with a common saddle, although the kiting is a bit more dangerous. This part of the fight is much easier than the second phase, but it's still a little nerve-wracking. If you mess up and let the tier 3 rook catch you, he'll deal 165 damage with just one bite, which is enough to one-shot most of the characters, even from full health. It's not mandatory to fight the rook last. The bishop and the knight also have tier 3 versions with their own strengths and weaknesses, and you can choose which one seems best with your playstyle. But I wouldn't generally recommend fighting the tier 3 bishop or knight on a beefalo. They have fewer hit points than the tier 3 rook, but their damage is much harder to avoid, and since the pan flute is not an option in this fight, you probably won't be able to take breaks to heal. The reward for beating the Shadow Piece is the still beating black heart of the ancient Fuel Weaver, so we're one step closer to that final boss fight. That's all for now, folks. Next time I'll finally be fighting jolly old Klaus. Later!